We're about ready to begin, so if everybody could please take your seats.
Can I do a microphone check with the body mic? Does that work? Everybody can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Father Don Schrantz. I am the pastor at St. John's in Clifton Springs, and the lucky one to have been nominated to run the Transition Committee, which, which is the committee that is responsible for a lot of stuff, including having the candidates here tonight and throughout the week, throughout the diocese. We're also responsible for the election convention, which will take place in February. The committee is also responsible for the consecration service, which will take place in July. And also a party for Bishop Lane to say thank you. And I'm sure they will find a lot of other stuff for us to do in between. I'd like to thank all of you for being here tonight. It's great to see so many from the diocese who are here, who are concerned about what's going on in this whole process of trying to find and elect and consecrate our next bishop. And we are so blessed for having 3 wonderful candidates. And they're up here. We have, so I don't get this wrong, we've got Cara, we've got Lauren, and we've got Rachel. And they're just beautiful people. And tonight you'll have a chance to hear them answer some questions that have already been posed by members of the diocese. And you'll also be able to have an opportunity to ask questions live. So I want to thank everyone. In particular, I want to thank Keith and the people of Two Saints for hosting us tonight. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. One more time. With feeling. Good evening.
Good evening.
Excellent. Thank you, and welcome to St. Luke and St. Simon Cyrene Episcopal Church, fondly known locally as Two Saints. We love that you're here. This is a warm and welcoming space for all people. And on behalf of the vestry, we welcome you with open arms. And we are so proud to be at the start of this momentous, and I would say historic, occasion, because we have, as a possibility, our next bishop being a woman. And though you were not the nuns on the bus, but I was raised by nuns 8 years and educated by them, it is women that will help the church grow and be more of what it can be. So we thank you for your particular charism as women. So without further ado, we need to get this show on the road.
Before we pray, I just want to quickly go through how things are going to work tonight. We're going to pray. Then we are going to have each of the candidates introduce themselves to you. We're going to do that right here. After they've introduced themselves, then we're going to break up into 3 groups. I'm going to ask some of you to go down to the chapel, some of you to go down into the the main room, I don't know what you call it here, the parish hall, and then the rest of you can stay here. If you need interpretation, please stay here. What will then happen is that we will alternate between questions that have already been asked of the candidates via a form on the diocesan webpage and your live questions. If you're going to ask a live question, you see the mic right here in the middle. We're just going to ask you to line up there, and we'll call on you to ask your question. Please realize that we've only got so much time tonight unless you want to spend the night here. And I don't think anybody really wants to do that. I've got a king-size bed waiting for me, and after a long day, that sounds real good. So they're only going to have between 3 and 5 minutes per question. So get the question out. Okay? Don't beat around the bush. Ask the question, let the candidate answer. Okay? And if we all do that, this is going to be a great evening. And even if it doesn't happen, it's still going to be a great evening. So I'm going to ask the chaplain of this whole process, Ginny Mazzarella, to please pray us in.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for bringing us together this night for a time of listening and learning. We ask you to bless our time together, and we especially ask you to bless our 3 candidates, Cara, Lauren, and Rachel. Lord God, may this time together help us as we prayerfully discern who you are calling to be the next Bishop of Rochester. So we thank you for bringing us together. Bless us as we listen and learn. In Jesus' name, amen.
They have no idea who we're calling up first. And the first victim is nerves. Cara, come on up. Please welcome Cara.
Good evening. So glad to meet all of you here and see you. My name is Cara Wagner-Shearer. I'm the rector of St. John's Episcopal Church in Chicago, in the city. I'm also dean of the Chicago North Deanery. I'm here today, I think, because I grew up in a small parish in southwestern Minnesota. The church itself might have held 60 people. And on the Sunday after Easter, because no one usually came to church, they let the youth group do the service. And I got to preach. And people said, "Oh, you should be a priest." I said, "No, I'm going to be a teacher." And that kind of experience happened a couple of times in my life, including finally answering the call and going into the discernment process and being ordained. How I got here also is because when 2 friends call you within a week of each other and say, "Have you considered Rochester?" I've learned that you better pay attention. I think we all heard the story of the call of the disciples on Sunday, and some of us had it paired with Jonah. And if you know anything about Jonah, you know you can run, you can hide, but God will find you. So being invited to listen to the Spirit and be part of your process, I've learned you need to pay attention to those nudges. So that's why I'm here tonight. Thank you.
Next up, let's go Lauren. Welcome, Lauren, please.
I'm Lauren Holder. I am the canon for community and education at the Cathedral of St. Philip in Atlanta, Georgia. I am here tonight with my husband, Jay, who I don't see anymore, but there he is, who grew up not far from here. And we have 2 children, Charlie and Lucy Ray. They are school-aged children. And this summer, when we were visiting his parents, as we were pulling out of the driveway and all of the tears were falling, and it was so hard to be taking this road trip back to Atlanta, Jay turned to me and said, maybe we should think about moving up this way. And then 3 days later, someone who was raised up out of this diocese sent this profile to a group of us and said, maybe one of you is called to this place and at this time. And I read that profile purely out of curiosity. I had no intentions of actually standing in this spot. But I read the profile and you took hold of my heart. Your stories, both the pain and the hopefulness and the imagination, all of it took hold of my heart. And I said, really, God? Jonah. But decided that I would just continue to walk through the process and see where it led, knowing that if I was faithful to that call, that God would be faithful to me and faithful to all of you. And so that is what brought me here. The things that make me think that this diocese is such a great fit for God's call on my life is that I am a small town girl from a small town church that thrives in really complex systems. And so this feels like a way of marrying those 2 things together, of serving small parishes while also really leading a complicated and complex system. But also because I love how your profile said that you were looking for a bishop to connect you with one another and connect you with Jesus. And that is my favorite thing to do every day, is connect people to one another and connect people to Jesus. It's where I experience Jesus, and I would love to experience Jesus with you in all of that way. Thanks.
And last but certainly not least, Rachel.
I'm so grateful to be here. I'm Rachel Tabor Hamilton. I am the rector at Trinity Episcopal Church in Everett, Washington, in the Diocese of Olympia. And before I was that, I am also a board-certified chaplain with the Association of Professional Healthcare Chaplains and the Episcopal Association of Chaplains. So I am certified through our Suffragan Bishop's Office for the Armed Forces. So in that work, I have worked in different places in the country, creating professional pastoral care departments and doing a lot of leadership formation as well as organizational formation for pastoral care. And in my work parochially and in the parish setting, I have been in positions that as I was still working as a hospital chaplain, I was also asked by my bishop in Olympia, would I take a parish that was going through organizational trauma. Part of my specialization as a chaplain had been to work with organizations and companies that had experienced corporate culture trauma. So I took that parish. They were a parish that was abandoned by people who wanted to be, we don't know what to call them, neo-Anglican conservatives. And they took the property. I was asked to be with the remaining Episcopalians. So there's more to say about all of that, but each call that I have had has followed on organizational trauma as a part of the work that I do, also doing leadership formation pieces, organizational formation, community development, and working with people to identify and assess beside them and with them what is their vision and strategic plan for where they need to head. Right now, in addition to being the rector at Trinity, I am your vice president of the House of Deputies of the General Convention of the Episcopal Church. I am Shakani First Nation, which is a band that is in British Columbia, and I was the first Indigenous person to be elected into an officer's position of the Corporation of the Domestic and Foreign Missionary Society. What called to me is long ago, not that long, I shouldn't say it that way, I sound like I'm a mummy. So some years ago, when I was a student, I was raised in Northern Ohio, and I was invited to attend SUNY Geneseo for my undergraduate work, specializing in theater and double majoring in anthropology. And in that work, I came across a medieval professor who said, you need to go and study these Trappists across the Genesee Valley in the Brevard. That began a long discernment for me, being raised by an Indigenous mother. To become Christian as an Indigenous person is essentially held very suspect. You're becoming part of the culture that eradicated your people. So what I have been is a bridge builder, both in my own life and identity, and in the work that I do in the church and in the world. When I saw and was presented with this particular profile, I thought similarly. I felt like I was discerning around the episcopate, but you can decide, gee, maybe I need to be a person in relationship, but who with? Because that's really important. And when I saw your profile, that is when I felt like the circular journey of beginning my discernment here as a Christian person identity, and also with the Episcopal Parish in Geneseo, brought me full circle in all the things that I have had an experience of doing to come back to you and say, I think this can help us all. Thank you so much for listening.
To help us move to the other rooms, I'm going to have Gretchen help me, Gretchen Rattery. And first I have to say to Gretchen and Patty Blaine, who are the two people really responsible for pulling together the whole tour. We couldn't have done it without the two of you. Thank you. Notice they're pointing at each other. It's your fault.
See, now this is when you lower it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot.
Hi, I'm Gretchen Rattery. I am the rector at St. Mark's Episcopal Church. Of course, it's Episcopal. In Newark, New York. And I am also the dean of the Northeast District. And I'm so excited to be here and be a part of all of this. So I'm about to send people to rooms. We have 16 seats in one room, 20 in another room, and then these seats. So, Don, you are going to...
I'm going down to...
Where we ate. Parish Hall.
Parish Hall.
So we need 20,
20 people.
30...
If you're not in the soft seats, people back there, there's soft seats.
There's soft seats back that way. So if you'll
People or so want to come.
follow Don.
That's right.
And you have Lauren. And do not fear, Lauren at some point will be in here. We'll be rotating them. Yes, Jay, keep her, yes. Okay, so, Shayna, come forward, come on down. Shayna Hawks, who is the rector at Christ Church Hornell and Good Shepherd Savona. She has Rachel with her, and y'all will be going into the chapel. So we need 16. And if y'all get over the amount, send them back this way. Sorry, I just need to sit. Yes. Okay. My back hurts. I get it. Oh, I get it. Been a long day.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, please.
Okay, if you're in this room, if you want to come forward and sit in a much cushier seat, please do. And Cara and Michael will be our people in here now. And in about, so we have about 30 minutes, 40 minutes in each room. I will be making the switch in a little bit. Good to see all of you. Thank you for being here.
Gretchen,
Yes,
are you going to ask?
I do need to ask. Okay, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, you have all chose wisely. Thank you for being here.
Hang on a second.
I'll continue, please.
Is there the need for ASL interpretation in here right now? Everybody, okay. All right, you may rest. Thanks.
Thank you, Gretchen. And I'm Michael Laver. I'm the rector down in St. Michael's, Geneseo, and pleasure to be here tonight. So just as a reminder, the format, we have a number of questions that have been submitted by you, maybe not you personally, but certainly people in the diocese. And the standing committee has collated all those questions on these 4 sheets of paper. And we'll try to strive for a balance of questions. We're all going to ask the same questions tonight. So we'll strive for a balance between these questions and questions that you might have from the floor. So if you have a question from the floor, I would ask you to line up behind the microphone there. And then what we'll do is we'll just alternate between preset questions and questions from the floor until we run out of time. And when we run out of time, alas, we'll have to stop to make room for the next candidate coming in here. So you will all stay here for the balance of the evening, which is good because all the food is back there. And then the candidates will kind of cycle from room to room. Does it make sense? Okay, well, how about we start?
All right.
Greg, you've all introduced yourself. Thank you for that. And I will kick us off with the first question. The first question is, what is your vision and or experience of diocesan partnership with ecumenical, interfaith, and or secular organizations that address issues of social justice, such as climate, incarceration, anti-racism, homelessness, food insecurity, judicial inequality, gun violence, and, you know, the whole range of social
Or all
justice
of them
issues.
at once.
So do you want me to repeat that?
No, I think I got it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
When I first became the rector of St. John's in Chicago, which was 18 years ago, I met a neighbor who was very passionate about the unhoused folks in our neighborhood, and in particular because somebody had been found frozen to death near the train tracks, which was near where they lived. And Cynthia was passionate, but not very practical. And the first thing she was like, I am going to rent a bus. I'm going to rent a bus, and we're just going to put people on it to warm them up. Instead, I was a new pastor, and many of the other area, we only had Christian churches, so it was ecumenical, and we were all fairly new, and we started Hands to Help ministry, and we also had no money because our churches were all small, and we made a partnership with the Business Association, kind of like the Main Street or the Chamber of Commerce, and they had what they called beautification money. And the person there had a real heart and decided that beautification could be helping people have better options than sleeping in the doorways of businesses and the train tracks. And it was one of those things that we know that God always provides, that there are more gifts than we know. And the Baptist pastor happened to be, she had done accounting, and she was like, oh, you need us to set up a not-for-profit? I can do that. I'm like, oh, I don't like filling out those forms. And you know, she did that, and the Methodist pastor had a feeding ministry, and so we created this community organization around resourcing, and we had nowhere for people to stay, but we brought people in and gave them resources and helped them connect with resources throughout the city. And that was a real lesson, both in just using the gifts that you have on the ground and counting on business and ecumenical partners. I've seen that in all levels of ministry. Another powerful thing I remember is we have a Muslim community center, and that became a place in which the neighborhood gathered around to support them whenever there were incidents nationally or locally. The neighborhood would show up in their place to say, you're our neighbor, you belong here, and that was just a groundswell of community members. On a diocesan level, I was on what we called the Congregations Commission, which was resourcing congregations that were not self-supporting, and this could be urban, rural, or suburban, and we were liaisons. And I loved doing that because it got me out of my little parish, and I got to meet Episcopalians all over our diocese and see how they were responding to God's call in their particular context, and how we could bring the resources of the diocese, which wasn't just money, it was connections and people and ideas, and how what they were doing helped inform how made me a better rector. So at all levels, I enjoy seeing where God is calling us, and trusting that everything we need to respond to the needs of our neighbors is already there. And so connecting the needs to the gifts, that's when I see God working in our particular branch of the Jesus movement.
Okay, thank you very much. I see we have a question from the floor. Patty, please.
It's a long one. What are your thoughts on deacon formation, their discernment, clarification of call, education, and placement? And how would you approach sustaining the work of the deacons in this diocese?
We have the gift of a lot of deacons in Chicago, and we've had the same struggle of what is a deacon, and what are they called to do. As I was having a conversation once with somebody about the diaconate, I said, why aren't we ordaining high school students and college students to the diaconate? Like, they are in the world, they are so in touch with everything, and they have their pulse on their particular community. Now, whether we do that or not, that isn't up to me, but I think, to me, that's my understanding of the diaconate, is that you find people that are already doing ministry where they are, and have a connection to the church, and you support that. And we have to be creative about priest formation already, because it's too expensive and inaccessible. And so the same things that we do to raise up priests and educate them, we should be doing for deacons. And as hard as it is, everybody's call is so unique that creating a path for a particular person is actually, I think, the most efficient way. So if somebody's already been to seminary, they don't need 3 more years of seminary. If somebody has already spent years in a hospital working, they don't need CPE or whatever the thing. So I think we have to very individualize it. And I also think it needs to be based in a church community. so that they know what it's like to be with people week after week, and people in the pews know how to draw out the call of people, and they know how to form us as deacons and priests. I didn't know how to be a rector when I started being a rector. My parish taught me how to be a rector. And I think that's same with deacons. I do think deacons do have a particular role in the service, which I think is really important and symbolic, and that is about bringing the world to the church and the church to the world, as we hear. I think we could pay deacons. I don't know why we can't pay deacons. Because something that's happened in our church is that the only people who can afford to be deacons are retired. And that isn't really the nature of being a deacon. It doesn't mean you can't be a great deacon when you're retired. But you could also be a great deacon at other parts in your life. But we have to figure out how to make that accessible to people. So I have a passion about that because I think as an Episcopal church, especially with small churches that can't afford full-time clergy, we need to learn how to minister to each other at all our levels, as lay people, as deacons, as priests. And that helps us not to get this idea that we need one person that we rely on for everything.
Good, thank you. The next question will be from the pre-selected set of questions, and it is about building up community in a disparate diocese in which parishes are rather disparate. How do you foresee building up community between parishes within our diocese? How would you nurture community among clergy, recognizing that our diocese is a combination of rural and urban and geographically quite disparate?
When I was on the Congregations Commission that I mentioned, I had a great road trip, which was about 6 hours to the Mississippi River, to one of the parishes that was really far from Chicago. Even though Chicago is the name of the diocese, it's the whole northern part of Illinois and down on the west side. And I went deliberately on the day that they had their food pantry. And it was in the church because it was the only space big enough to lay out all the groceries, and people came in and they showed me their little closet where they had, some shelving, and then I got to go in the car with the people who were delivering meals to people who couldn't come. And the priest told me that the Episcopal Church in this little town was the only church that would help you even if you didn't belong to the church. I'm like, yes, that's why we're here. Even though they struggled with Sunday attendance and paying their priest and all those things, they had vital ministry right there. And that's what I see as actually one of the great benefits of this diocese is Jesus wants us to go where people need to be with us and Jesus, right? Jesus is already there. We need to be where Jesus is, which is where people are struggling and where people are hungry and where people are lost and depressed, and we need to be there. So when you have a diverse diocese, you have better access to all the places where Jesus is in that diocese. And so I think that diversity is not, it's an asset, not a challenge. What I would say about how to create relationship, and what I learned from that visit and many others, there is no substitute for showing up. You have to be there physically. We learned this in the pandemic, right? Yes, you can connect on Zoom. It was great. It helped us connect. But being with people is the way you create intimacy and relationship. And you can't just fly in for a service and fly out again. You have to be there when people have whatever it is that's going on. So I'm looking forward to the Salt Potato Festival, wherever that is. I'm looking forward to the John Deere Mass. I'm looking forward to the Pride Parade, being where people are. And I think that helps create collegiality, but that isn't like, it isn't like the priest and I have a relationship and the priest and this priest. It's setting that as the model for everybody, because collegiality is about us all getting together as leaders, and there's really no substitute for being in the same room. And Zoom really helps too, so that people don't have to drive too much.
Thank you for that. Jesse, you're next.
Good evening. My name is Jesse Allen. I'm a member of St. Luke's and St. Simon's Episcopal Church, known as Two Saints. And welcome to Rochester. My question to you, the Rochester Diocese has a number of parishes that are in distress and seeking financial support. The Rochester area does not have the economic power of a Chicago. How would you, with your skills, your experience, come into this situation to manage these parishes as well as help grow this diocese? Thank you.
As you may or may not have heard on the news, recently Chicago has been inundated with busloads of migrants from our southern border. And week after week, I think we're up to almost 12,000 in a year and a half, and which I think is more than the Episcopalians in the Diocese of Rochester, actually. And there was a lot on the news of we didn't take good care. Talk about financial resources, I don't know. I mean, we didn't take good care of our homeless population before all these people showed up, or fed enough people. And so there was a lot about it's too much, we can't do this. I have a colleague who had a rectory, and they said, I think we could take like a family of 4. They ended up with 15 migrants in their rectory. And he recently spoke to us about his experience. And now, granted, he lives in a wealthy suburb. He said, the money isn't the thing when we went where God needed us, the money came. And people brought their gifts to the situation. That should not be what inhibits us from doing ministry. And so when we are doing the things that the people in the city or in a small town recognize as doing the work of Jesus, other people flock to do that. Do they have to be members? No. Will they ever be members? Maybe not. And maybe it doesn't matter, because God is going to do the work that God needs to do. I know in the Episcopal Church we get all worried about numbers. Somebody said to me just recently, the Episcopal Church has the same number of members we did between the 2 world wars, if that gives us a little more context. And so we did great ministry and raised people up and changed the world back then, and we have what we need. Now, I know the realities of trying to balance a budget when you can't pay the insurance, or you're like robbing Peter to pay Paul. I know that is real. And I think what I first had to preach to my people was, we actually have more than we think we have. We had to operate out of a sense of abundance and generosity. People give money because they feel hope not necessarily because you scold them. And so part of it is how we approach what we need. But sometimes it's really saying, there's a lot of money over there. How can we make that serve the places that need it in the city? The resources is here, it's our distribution. It's the same about hunger, right? We have enough food in the world to feed the world. It's how we decide. And that's about systems and decisions that we make as people and as leaders.
Thank you. Moving to the next question here. I think, as you probably know, there are wounds in this diocese related to a number of things, leadership transitions and things of that nature, that need to be healed. And members of the diocese are in need of support. What do you envision your role to be in this process as bishop?
When I was a little girl growing up in St. James, one of my favorite times was communion. And even though it was not a big church, I loved watching people go up to communion and coming back. And at that time, I thought I was going to be the great American novelist. And I had this idea that I was going to write a novel in which each chapter was a different person. And in the last chapter, they'd all end up in the same church. And I think that was my first inkling about the complexities of everybody that brings them together into one space and at one altar rail asking to be fed by Jesus. And the reason I think I love to be a priest is that I see God in the lives of other people. I see God in my own life. It's a little harder sometimes. You look back and you have those moments where you're like, oh, God was there. And you know God was there the whole time. But there are moments when you're like, yes. But the privilege of getting to know people and being moved by the way in which God has moved in their lives is, it's beautiful. And that's where healing begins. Is being willing to listen and to know the person intimately, to be trusted with the information of great hurt, but also of great joy. And so simple. I mean, it's important to love your people. You have to love them. You don't have to, it's the beginning. And when you love each other, then you're more committed to that healing. And I think it's also important to say the hurts and the trauma can be centuries old. In our history, there's been lots of trauma because of who we are and where we are. And then there can be immediate trauma or trauma in people's homes. And so everybody's in a different place. So there isn't one solution to healing the diocese. It's about each person being given the opportunity to heal and in whatever way that they need to be healed. So there isn't like, there's not a one formula fits all, but it starts with conversation and it starts with relationship.
Good, thank you. Reverend Peters, please.
G'day. Nice to have you with us. In case you're wondering, that's an Australian accent. Can you tell us about a time that you have experienced a crisis in faith? And what was the most helpful way out of that crisis?
I watch a lot of Australian murder mysteries because they're a little... I like the northern ones, like Norwegian, and they're very, very serious and freaky, but the Australian ones are always kind of funny. Crisis of faith. I think one of the greatest gifts that I was given as a child, and I have to think it's from my parents, but I don't really know, is I've always had this sense of God's presence and God's love for me. And in all darkest times, that has not gone away. And more and more, I realize that that is not everyone's experience. And I think the most absence of God that I felt was after the birth of our first daughter. She was actually an easy baby. She slept. She was beautiful. Everything was fine, and I was depressed. And my husband, who's wonderful, said, maybe you should join a mom's group. And I said, I don't want to join a mom's group. I want to talk to people. And then he said, let's go to counseling. I had postpartum depression. I had no idea. And I remember I went to church every Sunday out of habit, which is why we do it. And I just didn't, it wasn't that God wasn't there, it was that I wasn't there. I was just warming the pew. And that was my first experience of mental illness and what it does to you. I had always been such a joyful person, and I'd always had something to look forward to, and that sense of I can't make myself happy again was a very new experience as a young mother. And I think that is what opened my heart to where people are at, which is in very different places. When I have coffee with newcomers to my church, sometimes they're disappointed to find out they're not the only agnostic in the church or the only person with questions, and in fact, it has become a congregation where what's important about it is that we love the questions, we don't have the answers, but we like to be together and ask those questions. So crises of faith, that's the other thing, right? The opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. And when you're certain, you've lost your faith. Doubt is part of that journey of faith.
Thank you for sharing that vulnerability with us. The next question is written from the perspective of a layperson, and we've had several of these kind of questions that we've kind of coalesced into one question. I am a very active layperson. What support can you give someone like me who wants to work and preach in the church without going through the process of seminary? And that could be through the lens of licensed ministry or any other kind of lens you'd like to approach it through.
Okay, there's several questions here where you can't tell my bishop. No, she'd be fine with it. But I have lay preachers all the time at my parish because I'm only one priest, and sometimes I just need a Sunday. I'm still there, so I try to have a guest preacher once a month. And the way it happens is they might say something particularly interesting in Bible study, and then next week they get a call. Hey, would you like to preach? They can say no, and some do, but we've just develop some lay preachers because it helps people to hear from another perspective. So I'm all about when you recognize gifts of ministry, you raise them up. If you need a piece of paper with a signature on it, there's a way to do that too. And I think the other thing with lay ministry is I think we have to be very careful about not having slots that we need to fill. When I arrived at my church, this woman who was a toy designer was the one doing the books, and she hated it, but it was what needed to be done. And I was like, no. Sorry, I'm not good with microphones. No. Whatever you're passionate about, if you can find 2 or other 3 people that want to do it, that becomes a ministry. And you know what? Actually, the linens do eventually get washed. It does work out. But we can't say, well, we don't have a warden right now, so you've been here 2 weeks, but now you're going to be the warden. And I think that we have some rules around things, like we don't ask people to be Sunday school teachers or treasurers unless they've been in the church for a year. Those are important, but they're also important for the energies of lay people, and lay people need to have sabbaticals from their ministries. And also, there's been a lot of times when I've kindly said to some, they say, I can't quit because no one will do it. And I was like, well, try. Just quit and see, because sometimes people don't feel like they can step in because that person has been doing it for a long time and they don't want to take it away. So we have to be a little looser and let the Holy Spirit kind of mix things up and not worry if we go for a little bit without X, Y, or Z. I think just like priests and deacons have to listen to their call, we're all baptized, right? That's the most important thing. In fact, my good friend says being a bishop is a demotion, because lay people have a call from God to the whole world, and priests and deacons have specific kind of roles. But lay people, you're out there, and you are the face of Jesus and the church in the world.
Thank you for that. Do we have anybody from the floor that would like to ask a question? If not, we can go on to the next question here. This is fine. Okay, Devin, please.
I'm Devin Hubert, and I'm the chaplain at Episcopal Senior Life Communities. And I was wondering how you envision yourself connecting to any non-parish ministries of the diocese. ESLC, for example, serves 1,450 seniors, and we have Hobart William Smith College that has a vibrant ministry program there. So just wondered about that.
One of the requirements for seminary was actually training in organization, like union organizing or cause organizing, which is the ability to do one-on-ones to learn about people and pull them together around a cause. And that was really helpful as a parish priest in a neighborhood for two reasons. One, I did one-on-ones not just with my own parish, but with business owners, with educators, principals, whoever, our local alderman, which is like a little mayor. I now know our state rep because they're your parish. So one, it's realizing that God has called us to the whole place, not just the people who happen to walk in your door. And we still have that English idea, I think, of parish, which means, so I had, one of my parishioners said, I have a friend, his wife was diagnosed with fourth stage lung cancer. They're not really churched, but they want something. Could he come talk to you? And he said, why would you, we're not really members. And I said, because you are in my parish. And whether you knew it or not, I'm your pastor, right? And that is how, and I think that's what senior life communities are. They are part of our care, that idea of care of souls. So your parish isn't just the people who walk in. It is everyone in the neighborhood or the small town, or there's one parish that they're the only building in the town. So their parish is large. So in particular, I don't see either the chaplaincies or the Episcopal life communities being any different than a parish. They're just right there in the mix of all the things, and they need just the same support that a parish would need and the same relationships. So again, showing up, knowing the people, being present, and it's a two-way street. Like the bishop doesn't show up just to hear about what's going in the church, in the church, or to tell people what's going on in the diocese. It's to get information about what God is doing in that area. So the conversation has to come the other way too. So what is happening at each senior life facility is what God is doing in the world there, and we need to know about it if we're going to be responsive to it.
Great, thank you. This will be our last question for the session, as we'll transition about 7 o'clock in about 4 minutes. So, how can we, as a faith community, promote intergenerational engagement? How do we effectively minister to our elderly parishioners while working to appeal to middle-aged and younger people?
There was a book a while ago called Bowling Alone. More recently, I went to a conference that was said that Soul Cycle is doing better creating community than churches, which made me really angry, but it wasn't not true. People are looking for community. And I think one of the things that church offers that almost no other place does is intergenerational relationships. It is sometimes the only time a child will talk to someone, or a teen, God forbid, that is a different age from them and not related to them. And those relationships are golden. And I know some churches don't have very many children. I had a good friend who was in a small rural community, and people were like, we want the children back. And she's like, they're just dreaming about this time long ago. And there were still children in the community, and so they started an after-school program. So they got children. It wasn't necessarily on Sunday morning, but we offer that, and we can do it in a way that I think a lot of other communities can't do that. Also, I mean, I think about my own life. When I retire, I'd like to live in an apartment building with babies and teenagers and older people, and there's something rich about that. And if we don't have it in our communities, we need to think about how we can draw those people together. And it might be around the communion table, but it might be in other ways. That is a gift we can offer to the world, where people can find connection that they can't find other places.
Thank you for that. So we are now going to transition. Thank you for all of your answers and your questions. So as a reminder, you'll all stay here except to go get food and use the bathroom and everything else you need to do. And you stay here. I stay here too. Yeah, there's lots of food. The two saints posted and very generous. There's lots of food back there. Please do get seconds, thirds, or fourths. Okay, we'll gather together in about 2 minutes, so finish up what you need to do, and in 2 minutes we'll start the next session. Together, people, let's take our seats and we'll start in on the second session. Go ahead and get started. We're on a pretty strict time schedule here. It's like having a room full of my kids. It's all being disregarded. Okay, I'd like to welcome to the microphone our second candidate, Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton. Please do come up. Format of this day will take 2 questions on the sheet, questions to the floor, and we'll kick us off with a question from the diocese. Folks in the back, be quiet. All right, so the first question is, what is your vision? This is a kind of a long question, so I'm happy to repeat it if you'd like me to. What is your vision and or experience of diocesan partnership with ecumenical, interfaith, and or secular organizations that address issues of social justice and issues such as climate, incarceration, anti-racism, homelessness, and gun violence, and so on and so forth?
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, 2 of the organizations I've been very involved with have included Faith Action Network in Western Washington. It is a group of representatives from all kinds of faith traditions in Western Washington that work together with our state and local legislators to develop policies and also the work with what legislation is coming up on a slate with regarding any kind of social justice issues. So I was for a time representing our bishop's office to the governor's office of the state of Washington. So working as a liaison in that capacity, specifically one of the things that comes to mind was the state of Washington was working on a bill for marriage equality many years before the Supreme Court was doing that. And in doing that work, we worked very closely together as interfaith leaders with Governor Christine Gregoire. And when she approved that legislation, it almost immediately ended up going to referendum. So that same body of people and myself were invited into a process of being able to advocate for it when it went to referendum. So those kinds of pieces of work with colleagues. Also, I serve right now on the board of an organization called Paths to Understanding. And in Paths to Understanding, our whole commitment as faith leaders, we have imams, rabbis, Protestant and Catholic leaders, traditional indigenous representative leaders, and we work together to create curricula that do formation in each of our communities for people who are working towards social justice issues. Right now, we are developing a curricula to help our faith communities address issues that are coming up in our conversations around Israel-Palestine. So how to have those crucial conversations in ways that are committed to developing meaningful relationships between communities, are intended to educate, but also form us as people of faith within our respective traditions in ways committed to emulate events, incarnate what we're committed to in partnership with one another. One of the more recent projects from the Episcopal Bishops Against Gun Violence at the last General Convention, and the legislation that our Episcopal Church has committed itself to passing. I think one of the things I appreciate in my role as Vice President of the House of Deputies is being able to help shepherd along some of these really important pieces of legislation through our own body and help advocate what we are saying we are and what we say we are believing in with the Episcopal Church's kind of network government relations to our own federal government. So working in all those ways at every level, from the most local, we sit down with high school parent-teacher associations and grade school associations, and especially with our children right now, we're helping to guide some development of active shooter training that doesn't actually contribute to the re-traumatization of our children. Because if it's too live simulated, that's what it's doing. So it's all kinds of things as people of faith that we're bringing together.
Great, thank you. Mm-hmm. Reverend Blaine, please.
Hi. I'm not close enough, am I? I have a question about deacons. It's long. What are your thoughts on deacon formation, their discernment, clarification of call, education, and placement? And how would you approach sustaining the work of deacons in our diocese?
Thank you. I think the diaconal ministry is one of those things I've seen in different dioceses, almost treated sort of like a footnote. There's not a real intentionality around its development. So that is something that I've seen be very important and vital, that we really do need to pay attention to and put some money behind in terms of education and formation. With a deacon for us in the Episcopal Church, really for me, needs to be those people in the diocese, in our congregations, that is already doing work that for the most part is probably going unacknowledged. That if they left for any reason or moved away, we would suddenly realize what a hole we have because this particular person was doing all these things for us. So firstly, it's how do we even help our congregations and leaderships understand how do we identify deacons, people who have a diaconal heart. So that's the kind of the beginning in having it. What do we need? We're really clear in our canons about what deacons get to do quite specifically. They quite specifically get to read the gospel. They get to set the table. They get to do the dismissal. All of those things are about service, about proclaiming the word and living it. So that's the first thing. Let's figure out how we identify what we're looking for in associating with deacons. Once we've identified that for me, there are lots of options about what would formation look like. I hate the word training. It sounds like we're in a kennel club. But formation, and that applies to lay leadership as well. It's if we have a good sense of what we need our deacons to do, we also need to look at the particular needs of each of our congregations. And so while diaconal ministry has something universally in common about it, our congregations may have pretty specific needs. Whether it is like we went today to go see So Green, and maybe if you're in an urban parish, you're going to need some leadership around creating an urban ministry or helping to brainstorm and develop around that. So a deacon is a perfect kind of leader for that service in the world. In a smaller congregation, and you say, well, we're really not sure how we'd even support a person. We'd want to empower them as a staff person. So how do we even support that person? It could be that what we're looking at is some grants for a particular program development. There's a gazillion kinds of grants, not just within in this diocese that I've taken a look at how they're being utilized, but there's lots of different kinds of grants that could apply to specific kinds of ministry development that don't have anything to do with let's support a deacon, but let's support a ministry. So I think part of it is putting some real funding behind it. Now I know the church is having a very important conversation with Church Pension Group, and I've been privy to some of those conversations around what does justice look like in terms of any remuneration, in terms of benefits. So just know that that is a living conversation to which I am privy and feel is very, very important for all of us. Because if you're not paid, you're not actually on the radar at Church Pension Group. Did you know that? If you're not paid, you're not on their radar and you don't exist, which means that in a lot of our diaconal ministries, in our indigenous communities, in our communities of color that are relying on lay leadership, those profound leaders are being missed. So we need to see them.
Thank you very much. The next question is about the nature of our diocese. How do you foresee building up community between parishes in a pretty geographically disparate diocese? Urban parishes, rural parishes, quite, sometimes large distances between parishes. How do you foresee building up community between parishes within our diocese? How would you nurture community amongst the clergy?
Thank you. The first thing I would say is around the needs for communication. Communication is a lifeblood of connectivity, and where there's not good communication or adequate communication that actually can be received by the people hearing it, we need to look at how do they need to receive the information. For example, it could be technical. Our elders may not be on social media. They may not even have an email. They may not be on a computer at all. So how do we meet their needs? We can't just say, oh, well. When 67% of the church are people 65 and older. So we need to take a look at how they actually need to receive their information and respond to that. And even be able to say, well, I know you're concerned about printing out too many things on paper, but if you want to reach that population, you might need to think about a mailing. So there's that. And then connectivity in whatever way that forms, and really put some funding and money behind that, whether it's electronic or newsletter, et cetera. The second thing I would say is communication's awesome and relationship needs to be incarnate. The bishop needs to be portable and willing to be portable and not sit behind a desk in a comfortable office. I'm very clear that I am not a bishop, or if you think about it in terms of, the battlefield, I'm not going to sit behind a desk and tell other people what to do. I'm very much in the trenches for my own ministry. So I'll be wanting to go to where each of the regions are, listen to each of the parishes, the leaderships that are there, and help identify with them if they say, if only we had someone who knew about X. For example, Diocese of Utah needed someone who understood about accounting to help the smaller congregations whose treasurers couldn't possibly be able to do what a human resource person could do in terms of payroll. So we identified with them a couple of people for indigenous communities to be able to come out to those indigenous communities to help do education and even, in some cases, run their books collectively. So there's some creative possibilities about who do we need to connect from an urban setting that might be, really well equipped and resourced to our places that are under-resourced. Because if we're not able to help identify what the needs are around the diocese, we can't ask people who are resourced about where the resources could go to help our own. We are better as a church talking about what the needs are in Gaza than we are about what they are in the southern tier. We need to change our hearts and minds about that, and at least put a plus sign, Gaza and the people with whom we are in the same diocesan relationship. So with clergy in particular, I very much would want to go around to where they are. I don't have an expectation of y'all come to me. I think that we can have important gatherings together that are very vital to our own formation as a community of leaders. But I also think that's true for lay people. So that is also something. For me, I'm very much a both and. If I'm going to do it for clergy, I also want to provide opportunities for vestries, lay leaders who are leading congregations, deacons. I need to have everyone who's being identified with responsibility for leadership to be able to have support that they need and access to their bishop. I've seen that in too many cases. I want to be the kind of bishop, frankly, that I haven't always had as a person, as a lay person and as a priest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah, please.
Good evening. I'm Sarah Peters, and I'm a member of Two Saints here. And welcome to our diocese. I've carefully read your resume, and I'm amazed with all the different experiences that you've had. You would bring a wealth of information and experience to our diocese, and I thank you for all of the different things that you participated in. In particular, I was a delegate to or a deputy for General Convention, and I know how much work that takes. So my question is a little bit personal in a way. How do you feel that you will be able to balance your time with all the amazing things that we certainly wouldn't want you to give up your projects, but how would you balance your time? Do you see that as an asset or something that we'll have to struggle with?
Thank you for that. So yes, I will acknowledge that there are a lot of things I do simultaneously. What is hidden from view when I say, vice president, blah, 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 is that the president has assigned me to 7 different committees. So I also attend executive council in addition to 7 different committees, 2 of which are founding new things for the church, including the Coalition for Racial Equity and Justice. So I'm sitting on that founding body. And there's almost nothing I would say that I would want to at this point, because in the role I'm in right now. But I am also very clear. My priority is this diocese. Let me say that again, because I've had bishops who've gone all over the frickin' place except home. My priority is the diocese, and I feel perfectly comfortable saying to my presiding bishop, who I know and love and work with, I'm not doing anything else for the first year and a half but this, while I get a handle and work with all of you in assessing what the needs are and what the programmatics need to be and what the relationships need to become, and where is there woundedness that we need to genuinely be telling truths around and working with together. So all of those things are hugely important to me. Now, one by one, the one thing I would say is balance. This past year has been a complete whirlwind on that. The only reason it's working is because my bishop's office said, we want to support this work you're doing on behalf of the whole church. So we're going to give you a curate who actually already kind of knows what they're doing and won't be more work for you. And we're going to pay fully for that curate. Usually it's a half and half program. We're going to pay fully for 2 years for that curate, which was the term that I'm filling, and because of the shortness of this last convention. And then also they said, we're going to pay for 5 additional Sundays of supply, so that when you're gone, your church doesn't take the burden of those extra Sundays. So there's something in that about where do we have resources that if, in discernment with your standing committee, if we were to identify, yes, Rachel, that's important, we want you to do that in the life of the church, we would look together at how can we support that work so that nothing is dropped here, no balls dropped here. So we would work closely on that. And one of the ways that I've seen bishops resolve some of those issues is to have a retired bishop kind of in supply in the wings, and having a little bit of money given to them for very specific pieces of work. So there's lots of creative ways to approach it. I've looked at your budget many, many times. I practically have it tattooed on my brain, and you've got that squeegee room. So.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is, speaking about woundedness that you just mentioned, there are wounds in this diocese for a number of reasons, leadership transition among them, that need to be healed. And members of the diocese are in need of support. What do you envision your role to be in this process?
Thank you. So in the balance of my own life, finding things that kind of revitalize me and taking breaks and all those really good things, what I have done in my life as an organizational person is a whole series of circumstances I wish I had a whole narrative time to tell you about. But there's a whole narrative that informs my specialization in becoming an organizational assessor, working with companies and communities and organizations that have suffered trauma, and I mentioned that in my intro. And what I would be doing is that very first thing is listening to people and normalizing what they're experiencing or what they're ready to move off from or away from. And also just wherever there's pain, and that could be among leaders, it could be clergy, it could be lay people, it could also be people who had a very positive experience, but it's just sitting down and working, whether individually or with community, but creating very safe emotional places. That's the first thing. Because if we're going to talk about the invitation to general and genuine truth-telling, then I have to pledge to you that I will create a safe space to do that in, and there will be no repercussion for that truth-telling. I myself have too often been in the situation of being the whistleblower on a problem. A healthy leader will say, I don't like what you're saying, let's sit down and figure it out. A not so healthy leader who's threatened by that truth-telling will alienate that whistleblower, punish that whistleblower, and will not want to talk to that whistleblower, and suddenly they got blackballed on anything else they do. So that is something I've personally experienced, and I'm absolutely dedicated to saying, whatever we need to work through in terms of whether we call it a trauma response and recovery, a healing of relationships, as a bishop, the diversity of opinion and experience, of generation, of community, of conservative to progressive, as a bishop, I will work very, very hard to be in relationship with exactly who you are and not expect you to Gumby yourself into something I'm comfortable with. God needs you to be you, and so do I.
Thank you very much. Jesse, please.
Jesse Allen. I'm a member of Two Saints, and welcome to Rochester. I want to start by saying a skill that caught my attention that you spoke about, and that's addressed in your response to questions, is organizational trauma. I want to read this, followed by my question. You say here, I believe that success in ministry can no longer be measured by the historically used metrics and parochial reports of number of members and financial figures of revenue and loss. Parochial reports do not adequately capture the full reality of either the challenges or benefits of congregational life or the realities confronting congregational leadership. This is especially true in the post-pandemic life of the church, in which recovery will continue to require patience by all and support from diocesan leadership. Yes. I want to follow with my question. The Rochester Diocese has a number of parishes that are under distress. And this Rochester area does not have the economic powerhouse of resources that are found in many of our major cities. My question is, coming here, how would you manage and determine the survival of parishes that are under financial distress and grow the diocese?
Thank you. One of the things I believe is that each congregation is its unique identity. it's not a widget that's been cranked out of a widget factory, in that one technique and one solution is not going to be universal across the board. So my very first move would be to meet with those congregations and their leadership and listen for their life of that congregation, the history of that congregation, what has befallen that congregation and why, because there's going to be a different story in each case. For example, in the congregation I now have, I followed a priest that was removed for sexual misconduct. So working with issues of trust was paramount, and being the leader they could trust in every way. So doing an assessment is not doing an evaluation. An evaluation is looking for whether you're good or bad or successful or not. Assessment is, do you need this thing, item, building, whatever, to continue to be the life-giving community that you are? And can we work on a piece of grief that looks like needing to leave or sell a building, but also at the same time look at the challenges and fear that come along with a different incarnation, with a rebirth? For example, I had a congregation that had been a remnant of Episcopalians, that the conservatives took the property out of alignment with the diocese. I was invited by the bishop to go be with these remaining Episcopalians, and they were meeting in one another's homes. There's a whole model in our faith tradition and in the ELCA for home churching, for congregations of 20 or less to be able to still have financial support for visiting clergy, but the development also of lay preachers, in order to be able to continue as a community, licensed by the diocese, alive as the corporation, continuing with their bylaws with modification, so that they continue serving their community. I find nothing wrong with a community that even says, most of our members, we only have 20 people, they're all over 65. We don't look like we're going to be vital in the long term. Really? I know a bunch of people over 65 who'd probably like to meet you. And maybe your community metrics are the fact that that's the area you live in, is a bunch of retired people. So let's please let go of the fantasy that all of our congregations need to have young people in them to be vital and to be authentic and to be serving God's world. It is perfectly fine to say this is a community that needs God's word and also reflects the incarnation of God's face. So God's face can look old. and God's renewal can look like that. So that's what I mean. I'm trying to give examples of it needs to be on a case-by-case basis. In some cases, it may be that financial hardship needs to be rearranged. We need to look at those finances. We need to put together something else. You want a specialized ministry, we need to look at what grants could be available for that, along the lines even of the diaconal ministries. So each case, I've walked with a congregation that needed to close. It was in an old lumber town. It was part of a cluster model of parishes. And that's the other thing, is I've worked in several different models of congregations and understand them from the inside out. So it could be that this congregation and that congregation need to be yoked and supported with resources. So there's lots of ways to play out. The assessment becomes part of the dreaming together and not part of the condemnation. Success can look like a new beginning. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The next question is written from the perspective of a layperson. I am a very active layperson. What support can you give someone like me who wants to work and preach in the church without going through the process of seminary?
Right. So, as much as I think that there's a real value in residential seminary or all that, we know that what is encumbering to all of us is the expense associated with it. There are models that already exist in the church, and I speak from the experience of those models in indigenous country. In indigenous country, the majority of people who are going back to serve to those, and frankly in other of our communities and churches of color, is they're doing local option training. Now, sometimes people have an attitude that, well, there's second tier leaders who come out of local option training. We really want someone who went to seminary. So part of it is educating even the people in the pews about what is it you need. You might actually get the better person who did a local option training that more meets your needs. For example, we have 2 folks who went, in my diocese, who went through local option training, who are in an African church. And that's the community they represent and who lifted them up. And I'm sitting there on our Commission on Ministry right now, and one of the people said, after we examined both of them and they left the room, someone said, well, I just don't know how they can be, something for the whole church. I said, really? I think that's our church. It's perfectly fine as it is. And their bishop has said to them, they want them. The bishop that they came from has already identified them. So let's honor that. Let's honor that. But in part, it's our willingness to sort of change our minds and hearts around it. And for local option training, there are models that exist. Iona School that we can modify for specific situations. College of Congregational Development can be vamped up. A combination of online training that we would provide some scholarship for or meet half and half. But we have to look again at the individual person. So I can't say there's going to be a cookie cutter methodology to that either. It's what's available, what can we look at, is there a specialized ministry involved? I frankly think that one of our specialized ministries that we need to begin to look at is I think every diocese needs someone who's specialized in how we do close congregations. We do need someone who's specialized in doing assessments for innovation and transformation. Now, for now, the bishop would probably hold that role, but I think we need to be developing teams. Every diocese has a bunch of retired people in it that have skills, that are underutilized skills and underutilized wisdom. So there's also a way that we need to cultivate what we have among us and assess what we really have as our tools. Anybody in survival camp knows that. Any Girl Scout or Boy Scout knows that. You got to assess what you actually got to see if you can survive it.
Good, thank you. Reverend Peters, please.
Good day and welcome. I'm Peter Peters, a retired priest. So call me.
I will.
Can you tell me about a time that you have experienced a crisis in your faith? And what was the most helpful to you at this time? Thank you.
I think a crisis of faith came for me in responding to the invitation of the Episcopal clergy at Standing Rock to come be part of a Episcopal clergy action in response to the oil DAPL that was going in. So the oil pipeline that was going in was going across sacred ground. It was supposed to go closer to a populated dominant culture city and was rerouted because the dominant culture people had the political power to get them to move it onto a reservation. And then it went right across a burial ground and a sacred ground. And it was going to be risking contamination to their water source. And responding to that, my crisis of faith came in a moment where a bunch of heavily armored vehicles of retired Iraqi veterans, of retired and active police officers, are composing a security force of my own country against our country's citizens. And standing there in the face of that, watching what they were prepared to do, and suddenly, and hearing the language of being called an insurgent, of being called a person who was the enemy. I had this flickering moment where I just said, first I said, God, what have you asked me into here? What have you invited me into here? What have you invited me to do? Because I don't know how you want me to respond here. Do you want me to get arrested? I was literally, what is that? Is that going to be the answer? And just so I really thought for a moment, God has no control over this. This is human behavior going crazy. And then I realized in the next few moments, but I have control over me. And God made this to have a response. And so what I did is just simply stay there. And the indigenous people and the white allies and African American allies, Hispanic allies who were coming back, having been tear gassed at close range, so much that it was like milk pouring off their bodies. And I would take them over to the medical tent where they could be taken care of. And that's the only thing I was able to do in that moment. And it was one of the most powerless moments I've ever had, and yet I came to understand that it was exactly what I was being asked to do. Being present to people's pain, being present to violence, and being present to the question, whose country is this? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that powerful story. Do we have, it's my turn, okay. And then we'll end up with one question from the floor, and then we'll end this session. All right. How can we as a faith community promote intergenerational engagement? How do we effectively minister to our elderly parishioners while working to appeal to middle-aged and younger people?
So you know that earlier question about how do we have lay leaders formed and not be having to pay for seminary? In the same programmatics that we would identify and develop, we do this. We get people specialized who feel a call in their heart to go and be able to be with people who are seniors, maybe even people who are experiencing Alzheimer's and dementia. That is a specialized ministry. And I can tell you as a board certified chaplain, I've been with volunteers who have extreme adeptness and skill at that ministry. You do not need to go to seminary or even be a board certified chaplain to be able to have those skills. They need to be identified, supported, directed, and given the opportunity. So that's part of it. Is I think in the intergenerational life of the church, we need to get comfortable with the fact that not every church is going to be intergenerational, and that's fine. It could be a specialized ministry. Not every church is going to have a bunch of people of color in it, but there might be communities that are specifically that. That's another specialized ministry. We got to be okay with that. And not try to say, well, it should be integrated, or it should be this, or it should be that. That's a big thing. Please, let's not should on each other. We need to be able to dream together and also quietly be ready to set aside what our own presumptions are if we're going to be able to create really diverse churches in terms of generation. And also, I am absolutely committed to a staff position for youth and young adults. The stories I heard even at the retreat and in your profile show me that need. They show me that longing. And they also have told me stories that those kinds of programmatics were not sufficiently supported long enough or in depth enough to be able to succeed. So wishful thinking doesn't get us what we need. It does need a commitment from the full diocese for funding for a good amount of time with a good, honest strategic plan that everyone needs to buy into and be a part of if that is a resource that they are hoping to use. So part of it is, if we get that specialist going, then we get lay leaders and others, maybe our deacons who might identify that ministry for themselves, to be part of that effort. So in my indigenous life, everybody's looking out for each other in that way. And they're saying, hey, your old auntie over there needs you to be able to go and get her something. Your grandma, did you notice how she kind of can't get up without some help? It's the observational ministry of presence. We can all do that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from the floor? Please.
Good evening. My name is James Schwartz. First, I'd like to tell you that I commend you for going to Standing Rock with many of my comrades from Veterans for Peace who were really treated badly by the militia that was there. Because of an operation, I could not leave with my comrades. You talked about your experience in college located in the land that was stolen from the Haudenosaunee.
Yes.
You mentioned a middle-age history professor, Middle Ages history professor. I'm going to ask you to actually name names.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Was it Bill Cook?
It was Bill Cook.
Thank you.
He's an awesome person.
Bill's a colleague of mine.
Oh.
And anyways, I'm partly hard of hearing, and so I was hoping you would elaborate more on the experience that you were mentioning that at Geneseo that informed your call
Thank you.
in life.
Well, I'll try to tell that in just a couple minutes because I know there's still some things to be asked. Geneseo was one of the most formative times in my life as a student, because not only are you kind of doing the education you hope and expect for, but really it was an opportunity to be in community with other people, asking questions without the shadow of a family set of expectations. Okay? And finding safe places to ask those questions and explore identity. As a person who is bicultural, being able to reconcile a colonial settler heritage with my indigenous heritage means that I'm deeply committed to bridge building between the diversity and difference of opinion and difference of experience. So being open that way and very much needing to kind of unify in my heart before I could even go out into the world and try to bring peace out there, was the experience of the Trappist monastery in juxtaposition to also the experience of St. Michael's Episcopal Church. Where they came together for me happened to be at the Newman Center. Thank you, Newman, who was an Episcopal priest and became Catholic. So in that whole kind of mergence of experience, seeing the intentional community of Trappists, I remember having the moment where I said, thank God I'm not a man. Can you get it? Thank God I'm not a man. Or I'd want to be a monk. I'd want to move here. I'd want to be a Trappist monk. I can't do it. I'm off the hook. But that's where I first began to recognize what I would later become understanding as a vocational call. And it was the encouragement of not my family, and not even necessarily of everyone around me as a student body who I would come back and try to talk about, and they'd look at me like I just said something freaky. I feel called to ministry. Oh my God. So, and so the whole experience then took me on a long journey because I tried to intellectualize it. I got a master's in anthropology to understand cultural approaches to religion. I became a specialist in the Levant, history, and the Mediterranean. Not as much as you, sir. And then I went on to study folklore, to look specifically at where were the really true experiences and examples throughout that history of women, of women's formation for leadership, for religious leadership. All of that was me sort of dancing around the council fire and never approaching the fire with my own prayers of tobacco. And in my tradition, you pray and put some tobacco on the flame. The Holy Spirit was throwing tobacco all over me, and I had it reversed in my mind. So when I finally got to the place where I said, I feel called, and I'd already gone through the whole process of becoming a board-certified chaplain, and I had become Episcopalian in the midst of that, because I realized I cannot run from this prayer. I need to make myself available to the holy. And in the walk of following Christ became the confidence to say, whatever comes of this, God is here. Where I became very convicted about Rochester was in recognizing through your profile that everything that you were calling is right in this life, not just in this heart, in the experience of my life beginning here and coming back here and saying, if this is to be, I absolutely offer 100%. I understand the priorities. I understand the mission. You have me fully, no doubt. And I promise to you, if this becomes my tribe, we together will be the incarnation of Christ's kingdom on earth. I promise it to you here in Rochester. Sorry, I'm going to shut up now. I'm sure we've gone over time.
No, this is great.
Okay.
Thank you for being with us and for opening yourself to us, and please join me in thanking.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Wonderful. So let's take 2 or 3 minutes, and that's like really 2 or 3 minutes, around 120 to 180 seconds, to get some water, some food, use the bathroom quickly, and then we'll gather
Thank you
back
for
here.
hearing, for your listening.
Rachel, thank you so much. Okay, everybody, your 180 seconds are up, so if we can take our seats, we'll start this third and final session. Would you like?
Yeah, I might actually, can I move it up a little bit so I get a little closer? Sorry, guys. Just wanted to get a little closer to you.
We're gonna start this third and final session, and the format is exactly the same. We'll switch between questions that are here on the paper and questions from the floor, and we'll start with one of these pre-canned questions, if you will.
I'll try to act like it's the first time I've heard it.
So first of all, let's welcome the Reverend Holder here with us. And his first question is, what is your vision and or experience of diocesan partnership with ecumenical, interfaith, and or secular organizations that address issues of social justice such as climate change, incarceration, anti-racism, homelessness, gun violence, so on and so forth?
So my vision of ecumenical and interreligious engagement is also my experience of it, which is that it be both authentic and organic, especially around things about social justice issues. I think that it is important that we have relationships that are built not just when we are in crisis, but that those relationships are formed long before that, so that when things happen, like for instance recently, October 7th, when my friends or people in the parish were texting me and saying, what are we doing to support our Jewish friends, or what are we doing to support our Palestinian friends? It felt like they were looking for someone to provide them with a relationship that they didn't already have, and they were feeling convicted that that relationship was not already there. I think that it's important that we already have those relationships in place, so that when we are responding to an issue, that we are doing it out of meaningful connections that are not performative, but that are organic and authentic. I used to work in the Office of Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement at 815 when I was in seminary. I was an intern there. And it was so life-giving to be able to find the different ways that communities could support one another, not just in times of crisis, but also in the daily life of being people and being humanity and being church or being a faith community. And so I think that work is parish ministry, that whenever we are in relationship with others, that we are stronger in our own faith. And so it's not something that should just be for social justice, but for all times. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Robert Blaine?
I like the way I sneak up here first every time. I have deacon questions.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on deacon formation, their discernment, clarification of call, education, and placement? And how would you approach sustaining the work of deacons in our diocese?
Thank you. So I have served in 3 different dioceses, and deacon formation and how deacons are placed and all of that has been different in all 3. I am someone that thinks that if we are going to have deacons, that we really pay attention to their formation. I think that that if we are going to have deacons, that they, for the sake of the deacons, for the sake of the churches that raise them up, and for the sake of the churches that they serve, that we need to really take that ministry seriously. Otherwise, we just shouldn't even have it. So I think that formation is really important. I am someone who thinks that deacons should be part of the discernment of where they serve. I know that in some dioceses that deacons are moved around at at the advice of the bishop, at the choice of the bishop, and they serve in that capacity for 2 or 3 years and then move to another role, and usually not in the churches that have raised them up. I see some of the wisdom in that, but that's not my personal. I don't think that is the best thing for the deacons or for the church personally. I think that it would be better to let the deacons be part of that discernment and to say perhaps a church raises them up and they feel called to stay in that church. Or perhaps a church raises them up and they feel called to do something more outside of the church, like Southwest Mission. And that needs to be the voice of the deacon speaking into that process. That if we trust that they are called to be deacons of the church, that we should trust their discernment in that process as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yes. No, please.
You're the first one I've asked. So would the deacon answer to you or to the church they're in? And how often would they meet with you?
That is a more granular question. Let's see. So yes, the deacon would report to me, but they would also need to report to their local context, obviously, because that's where their day-to-day ministry is going on. But yes, I do think that the deacons would report to the bishop, and I also think that in terms of how often we would meet together, we'll get into this, I think, in some of the other questions later, but one of my visions would be for the clergy to be meeting together regularly with the bishop, and so that would be an opportunity. My experience is that deacons also really like to hang out with each other. Recently, when we had our most recent clergy conference, there was, afterwards, it ended right before lunch, and so a bunch of us went to a restaurant afterwards because it was kind of the only restaurant within 20 miles. And, sorry, hot mic. And so and there was this table of deacons, and I was like, can I join you? And they're like, no, we're having our deacon moment. And that was good. I mean, I was appreciative of the fact that they have a certain special community that they were sharing with one another. So I'd want to give some space for that too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. This next question is recognizing that the diocese that we're in now, and you've seen some of it in the tour today, is a disparate diocese. There's a lot of distance between parishes all the way down to almost the Pennsylvania border, and there's a balance between urban and rural parishes. So in that context, how do you foresee building up community between the parishes within our diocese, and then how would you nurture community amongst the clergy?
So you're going to hear this a lot from me tonight. Communication. Because the two things that I would want to really focus on the most in the first couple of years here are expanding our communications, being really good communicators, both in terms of transparency and in terms of getting the message out there, communicating with one another, but also relationship building, a lot of breaking bread with one another. Jesus told a lot of stories and had a lot of meals. And I think that is something that we can embody as a church, and that when we do that we are remembering Christ's presence among us in a real and special way. So I would want to increase our communications with one another, but also with the outside world. This is really hard hearing the questions the third time because I'm trying to remember what I've said and what I haven't said, and also whether or not if this question's going to address it. So I'll say this now, but it might be that it's supposed to answer one of the later questions, in which case I'm sorry, Michael. But one of the things that I think we do really well in the Diocese of Atlanta is we have a communications person on staff who is not just providing communications for the diocese, but for parishes that do not have a person on staff to do that. So he's very gifted, and he will go out to various parishes, and he will listen to their stories. And he will interview them on camera. He'll interview lay people, he'll interview clergy, and he will listen to the stories of the parish. And then he'll bring out his drone, and he'll do one of those really cool aerial shots and put it in slow motion so it's really dramatic, and add some music. And then he puts together this beautiful welcome video. And 3 things come out of that. The first is that the church sees themselves in a different light. They see that story reflected back to them, and they're like, wow, look at us. Look at what we do. We're really doing some good stuff. And then they feel instead of focusing on the decline, they're focusing on what they have and what they can offer. The second thing that it does is it gets the message out to people that might be passing through town and are like, oh, I'm, in Watkins Glen for the weekend because that's a place where tourists might be. And they're looking online, they find that there's this wonderful video, they feel inspired to go to church. Maybe it's just for the weekend, but they're still there. But then the third thing is that it allows, whenever he creates one of these new videos, he shares it with the whole diocese. So me, being at the Cathedral of St. Philip, I don't get to worship at St. Matthew's in Snellville. But when he goes and makes a video of it, now I know something about that community that I didn't know before. And so it allows the diocese to connect with one another. It allows parishes to have a better understanding of what the stories are of the different parishes. It also allows the outside world to see what we're doing in the church, and then it also allows the parish to see themselves in a really beautiful light.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the floor? Jesse, please.
Jesse Allen. First of all, welcome to Rochester. Thank you for coming out to us.
Thank you.
My question kind of deals with, shall I say, some of the economic challenges that this diocese face.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at your resume, get impressive, and I see Cathedral of St. Philip's, Atlanta, and St. Luke's Episcopal Church of Atlanta, and I see Trinity Church, Wall Street. I say, that's impressive. And when I view this, I'm seeing locations, areas of significant wealth, growth, including suburbs. The Rochester Diocese is struggling. There are a number of parishes that are under distress.
Mm-hmm.
The level of economic resources and growth is not what is occurring in Atlanta, surrounding areas, in Wall Street. The shall I say, connections to resources, people that can bring, shall I say, financial wealth, it's more so limited here. So my question is, given the challenges that you have, the number of parishes that are under distress, how would you, coming here, manage that, determine which parishes are still viable, determine what skills you can bring to bring about a level of, shall I say, economic vitality, as well as membership growth to this diocese? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very good question, and if you weren't going to ask it, everybody else was going to think it, so thanks for putting it out there. It's true. I have served in really gifted places that have a lot of resources and that are growing, that are experiencing growth. So the parish where I serve right now, our membership is growing every year. And some of that is because of what we're doing at church, and some of it is because Atlanta is growing, and we are reaping the benefits of that. A lot of the churches in this area are experiencing church decline, but also economic decline, and that is something that is unique not unique just to this diocese, but it is a quality that is very present. It's also one of the things that for some reason draws me to you. When I shared this profile with various peers, some people said, "This looks really depressing." And I said, "I think this looks really inspiring because it's so true. It's so honest. And I really appreciate that about the search committee writing such an honest profile. What I can bring to that is that I do have excellent leadership skills in complex systems. And the diocese is a complex system. And the places where I have served have known some really difficult times that you wouldn't necessarily assume because they are who they are or where they are. But they have known really difficult times, and I have learned a lot from how to deal with conflict or lack of resources in the midst of those times. It's not exactly transferable. It's not. But I am a very decisive person. I have an ability to come in and see what is going on and to observe and to analyze and to listen. And I think that one of the gifts that I bring, having not come from that context, is that I bring a sense of humility to it. So rather than come in and say, well, this is how we did it at X parish, or this is how this is how I did it, I'm going to come alongside you and listen to you and say, how can we work through this together? I'm a very creative problem solver. And I also have this immense sense of hope for this diocese. Not a naive sense of hope, I don't think. I think it's because it's less about what's not working and more about the things that I see, the sparks of imagination, of creativity, of resurrection. This diocese isn't going to look the same way 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I don't know what it's going to look like, and you don't know what it's going to look like. But I really want to figure that out with you. And I know that I have the ability to come alongside you and be creative about how we can be a resource to one another. So I'm not going to bring in this context of having served in a small parish, but I am going to come into it with the context of having been raised by a small parish, know exactly how important those small parishes are, knowing exactly how they are the backbone of small communities and large communities alike, and be completely dedicated to making sure that I am a resource to you and that I bring everything that I have to be able to problem solve alongside you.
Okay, great. Thank you. This next question is recognizing that there are wounds in the diocese for a variety of reasons. Some of them include leadership changes that need to be healed. And members of the diocese are in need of support. What do you envision your role to be in this process?
So I envision my role to be one that is a ministry of presence. And I want to be extremely accessible to you as a diocese. It's actually one of the things that calls to me about you in the first place. I love that there are 43 parishes here and that I would be able to get to know people, that I would be able to recognize faces. I'm not always great at names, I will confess. That's something I need to work on. Thank you for wearing name tags. But I would know your faces and I would know your stories, and that is something that really speaks to me. So I am already forgetting the question. This is really hard the third time through.
So there are wounds in the diocese.
Thank you, woundedness. Yep. So with the wounds, that I would want to be the ministry of presence, that it would be really important for me to be present with all of you. One of the ways that I would want to do that is to visit your parishes outside of Sundays, instead of just being like, this is your one and done, to be able to come and visit during the week. I also would love to be able to hold office hours in the various different districts. So one week I'm in the Northeast, one week I'm in the Southeast. You could give me all of the best tips on where the best coffee is, where the best ice cream is, where the best bench at a park is, and then I could sit there for half of the day and have office hours and be able to hear your stories and know what's going on in your parishes and be truly accessible to you. But that ministry of presence is not just about the bishop being with the parishes, it's also about you being with one another. It's about your ministry of presence with one another. Because we are the body of Christ when we come together. And that doesn't just mean this parish and this parish and this parish, but when we are all together. And so I remember, Val, I used this word downstairs earlier and everybody looked at me like I was crazy, but it's your word, hootenanny. Ooh. Hootenanny. That we would have hootenannies, that we would have potlucks, that we would have gathering, right? That is you, right? Yes, okay. That we would get together and have fellowship with one another and make it fun and be able to get to know each other in real and palpable ways. And then one of the questions that I received earlier had to do with like, what are, besides like communication and getting together, what are some of the specific things? I think that there are organizations that you can bring in for healing, things like the Lombardy Mennonite Peace Center that can do good work if people actually want to do the good work. I've seen that work well in places and less well in other places based on how receptive people were to it in the first place. But there are other things that we can do, like Sacred Ground, and some of the various programs where people come together to have really difficult or uncomfortable conversations and truth-telling. And the more we are able to practice that at church, the more we are able to practice that out in the world. And so I think that if we could maybe use some of those programs as a foundation to be able to learn how to have those difficult conversations, that it would allow us to also talk about some of the woundedness that's here.
Thank you. Thank you. A question from the floor? Reverend Hartney.
Yeah, I'm Michael Hartney. I don't go by Reverend anymore. I am from Watkins Glen. Thanks for the shout out.
You bet.
I'm going to build on what Jesse started to talk about, St. Luke's Atlanta, Trinity Parish, the cathedral. But in your intro, an hour and 2 hours ago, you said you were from a small church with a small place, and that's who you are. Talk about that.
Thank you. You trying to save me out here?
Well, those people who know me know I'm not trying to save you.
That's Jesus' job, right? So the church that I grew up in Lexington, Virginia. Lexington, Virginia is a town. When I was there, it was a town of 7,000 people, and then and it's a very rural community that has 2 universities, and so it also has a lot of culture, and it's a beautiful place. It's one of my favorite places in the whole wide world, and the church there. When I was attending church was called Robert E. Lee Memorial Episcopal Church. Right. It now has returned to its original name, Grace Church. And I always knew it as a place of grace. I came to that parish, moving from Texas to Virginia with my family, and it was a place where, if I'm honest, where I spent a lot of my agnostic years. But my family had a requirement that we come to church every Sunday, that was something that we did as a family. And my mom, who I think might be watching right now because my son sent my husband a text message that he could see us on screen. They should be in bed right now, by the way. Mom, put the kids to bed. But my mom did this very gracious thing where she taught my Sunday school class that I was required to go to on comparative religions. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but it was her effort to try to allow me to learn about other things so that I could really claim what was true for me and to feel. So it was a very safe place. And since then, as an adult, I've gone back and preached a couple of times, and it is still just this tiny, vibrant place. They're doing some new things that are really cool. They've changed their worship space a little bit, while also maintaining what is very traditional about it. They have an incredible music program, which is one of the things that has really been able to speak to people. But it was always a place where I could go and be myself, even when myself did not feel like a church person. And so when I went to seminary, they supported me, even though I hadn't been there for quite some time. And that was, so there's been this continuing connection that has been meaningful to me. But you can imagine, how that name change might have gone. And folks that left the church because the name wasn't changing, and then the name did change, and then those people didn't come back, but other people left. And so they're really they've had to, in some ways, reinvent themselves with a lot of the same people that are really faithful and still there, but also really ask a lot of those difficult questions about who are we and who is God calling us to be, and what does it look like to be Grace Episcopal Church in Lexington, Virginia in 2024. So.
This next question is written from the perspective of a layperson. I am a very active layperson. What support can you give someone like me who wants to work and preach in the church without going through the process of seminary?
So I think that lay preachers are such a gift, and because every preacher needs a break. There are so many people that have wonderful public speaking skills and have such wonderful stories to tell, and yet they are not going to give 3 years of their lives to a seminary education, or don't feel called to the sacraments, and don't feel called to be a priest, or don't feel called to be a deacon, but still have so many beautiful things to say that we can all learn from. I have learned a great deal from lay preachers because where I serve, we have a Spanish service every Sunday, and when Juan, who is our native Spanish speaker, is away, sometimes I will preach because I also speak Spanish. But sometimes one of our congregants, who is a beautiful preacher, will preach instead, and she has ministered to me again and again. So I think that in places where we don't have full-time clergy, that it's important to be able to lift up licensed preachers, and so if you're not doing it all the time, you don't even really have to be licensed. You could be a guest speaker essentially if you're doing it only occasionally. But even in places where there's full-time clergy, it can be so inspiring for parishioners to hear from other parishioners. That is, I think that sometimes that preaches louder than the priests themselves. And so I think being able to lift up that ministry of sharing our stories from the pulpit, so sorry, would be really life-giving.
Great. Reverend Peters, please.
Good day and welcome.
Thank you.
I'm Peter Peters. I'm a retired priest in this diocese. Can you tell us about a time when you have experienced a crisis in your faith, mm-hmm. and what you found most helpful at that time?
Thanks, Peter. Oh, a crisis of faith. A crisis of faith that I can share with a room full of people. Okay. I hope that this one's okay with my dad. But when I was 25 years old, my dad came out, and there was no question that I about how I felt about him, but I had a lot of questions about how the church might feel about him. And part of what was so difficult for me was seeing the amount of self-loathing that he had, I think some of that came from his experience in the church too. And I remember, really wrestling with God. Why would you allow my father to experience a life that he would hate about himself, right? I went to see 2 different clergy after that. I was in Lexington for the weekend. I was in Virginia visiting my family. And so I went to see 2 different ministers, not at the Episcopal church, because when I was in college, I went to the Presbyterian church because I didn't want to go to the same small church as my parents while I was in college. It's, understandable. And one of the clergy said something along the lines of love the sinner, hate the sin type thing. And the other one, Bill Klein, sat me down and helped me look at the various different Bible verses that people kind of weaponize gay people with, and was able to, and helped me see how those things were being misconstrued, and so that it no longer felt like a conflict between my dad and the church, and definitely not a conflict between my dad and God. And so that was something that was really important to me, to be able to have that faith leader, to be able to, I had plenty of friends that could have given me that same support, but for it to be a clergy person in the church was really important to me, because it really felt like where my hurt was the most, where my pain was the most, was this question of like, why, God? And so that was a crisis of faith that has shaped me, and I think that it's made me a better person and a better priest. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you for being vulnerable with us. Thank you for that. This will be our last question, I believe, and then we'll all come together for a moment of prayer. And this question is, how can we as a faith community promote intergenerational engagement? How do we effectively minister to our elderly parishioners while working to appeal to middle-aged and younger people?
So I'm going to say again, communications. I think that how we communicate with each other is so very important. And when I first started feeling called to this diocese and to this ministry, I looked at the wonderful website that Val put together with a lot of help, I know, and read all of the different parish profiles. But then I also went to every single parish's website or Facebook page or whatever I could find. Some cases I could find nothing at all. Some cases I could find something that hadn't been updated in 10 years. And so, but then also to the diocesan webpage, and I remember looking up the diocese on Instagram and finding 2 posts, and the last one was maybe 4 years old. And there's no TikTok presence, which I am not on TikTok, but the diocese should be. And so when I think about like the average age of a Facebook user is, I think, 55 and up. And that looks like our churches, and so it's a great way of communicating to the people that are already in the pews. But if we want to reach out to people that are not in the pews, then we need to expand our communications. I think that that's really important. Another thing that I think is really important is that you know that you have something to offer young people. That it's not just about getting young people in the church because they're going to save the church, but that you have something to offer young people. That there's something about being in church that has saved you, right? That has made your life more meaningful, that has allowed you to encounter God in real and palpable ways, and that's something to share. So when we look at bringing young people into the church and having more intergenerational stuff, it's not because they're going to be pledging units 20 years down the road, but because we have something life-giving to offer. You have something life-giving to offer. Another piece of that is, with the communications, is technology. I know that not everywhere in the Diocese of Rochester has great access to internet. And so I would be curious about how to increase our accessibility to one another when internet is not available. If I had a magic wand, that would be like the first thing I would fix, is like the infrastructure of communication and technology across the whole diocese so that we could be in better communication with one another. But I lead a wonderful Bible study on Tuesday mornings with a group of well, they're not all octogenarians, but one of them told me that I should tell you that's what they are. They are this wonderful group of women, and when COVID hit, we had to all move to Zoom. And then when COVID left, or, got more manageable at least, we went back to in-person, but half of them stayed on Zoom because they were like, you know what? I'm retired. I don't want to be at church at 7 o'clock in the morning. I would much rather be in my pajamas. And so they are still, half of the group is on Zoom and half of the group is in person. And then the other thing that happened was when we moved to Zoom is that younger women started joining too. So this group that everybody thinks of as the octogenarians, of older women in our church, just had 2 babies in December. 2 babies, because we now have younger people in that group too. And everybody was shocked that I had 2 babies from my Bible study. They were like, they can have babies? Yes. Yeah, right. So I think that being able to make technology accessible and making ourselves accessible to each other through technology is important. It's not a replacement for being present with one another. It's not, but it can help.
Thank you so much, and
Thanks.
please join me in thanking Lauren Holder for being here. Thank you to everybody that's watching over technology. We'll meet back here in just a couple minutes, and we'll kind of wrap things up with closing prayer, and then we will send you on your way with God's blessings. Thank you.
Thanks.
Everybody, if we'll have a seat, we're going to have a closing prayer. So please do take your seats, and then we'll be able to wrap up here. While we're waiting for Reverend Mazzarella to come up and do a closing prayer, I want to be sure to thank our hosts, Two Saints. Some of you don't know this is my home parish. It's just such a blessing to be back and to see all of you. So thank you for the wonderful hospitality that you've offered us. Thank you, Don, our chair in this endeavor, and Gretchen and Patty for organizing. And finally, thank you to our candidates who have opened themselves to us and been vulnerable with us. So thank you very much. And thank you, Ginny, for being our chaplain.
All right, friends, let's pray. Gracious God, thank you so much for this evening of listening and learning. And now, as we go home, we ask you to bless us on our way in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Go in peace, my friends, to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. Off you go. Hallelujah.